Today, what we're trying to do is recalibrate our church, your family, your own life, and areas of influence you have to think of the next generation. And I will just say this very bluntly today. If you have no one significantly younger than you that you're mentoring, you're not fulfilling your God-given purpose today or next week, whenever. And so I would ask you, if you don't have somebody right now that's a legitimate concern or burden or need, is may God plant in your heart someone that you can reach, and if it's not in your immediate family, someone else that God gives you. So what I want to do is answer just a couple of questions today, and these are just a few practical things. The position of this preacher and pastor is not I have the answers, but try to do a little bit of back study and to prep for today, and want to discuss just a couple this morning. The first question is, how do we keep technology to a minimum? A question fielded by one of our church folks, and I wanted to just answer that with a couple of things today. You may not know this, but just over 10 years ago, the iPhone was invented. Feels a lot longer than that to me. And with personal access and individual access to the web and the things found upon it, things have changed. It used to be way back in the old days, families would gather around one fire, and they would fellowship and be connected by that. Then even in dysfunctional America back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we'd at least gather around one TV. With personal devices, that has been fragmented. And one of the concerns that I have is what that's doing to our families, unfortunately to our marriages. We check on Facebook long before we have a face-to-face with our spouse many times, and other things of that nature. And so obviously it is of concern. With that being said, I would say technology is not our enemy. Hopefully in this church you already appreciate that. If you're offended by wireless mics or screens, you're in the wrong church. I think we understand that. Technology is not our enemy, but it often is symptomatic of other things behind that. I believe our issues on the technology front are more the result of issues that maybe were not as glaring in the past in our families, and it has revealed that in a very stark way. And so may I just encourage you, technology is not a trend. It is here to stay. It was fascinating me as I was reading back through the unveiling of different technologies. One of the things that I see is that technology is the pace at which it develops now compared to maybe in days gone by that often overwhelms us as parents and grandparents. But I will say this, it's here to stay, and just as maybe other technology was resisted. And what was interesting was I was reading an advertisement for the first televisions that were being unveiled, and they kept advertising it as this: it's a radio with pictures. I thought that was funny, just that was the way to explain this new technology. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we view that as the enemy instead of realizing that it's here to stay. Obviously needs to be done with constraint and moderation, but something to adjust to. And so I want to give you just a few things. If you're taking notes today and you're dealing with this, or we'll deal with this, these may be of help to you. A few thoughts, not original with me, but compiled from different authors and resources. Number one, here's a way to deal with the rushing current of technology and how to filter and process that in your home. Number one, anchor your lives in eternal things. Make sure that that which is eternal is what you value and what you promote. A lot of things shared and posted and that go viral online have a very short shelf life. Number two, be aware of major trends. If you parent or you're a grandparent and you're not aware of what's going on, you will not be able to be a step or two ahead and protect and provide for your kids and grandkids. Thirdly, have intentional and honest conversations. I often have had conversations as a pastor, and now beginning, I guess, to have this in a context as a parent, is you don't trust me. And it's not an issue of trust. It's a matter of knowing that their heart, and honestly, I don't trust them, just like I shouldn't trust myself. But we need to be very frank, ask questions, let the Holy Spirit probe and prod and bring confrontation where needed. Fourthly, engage with them in their world. I think it's good to use technology to stay connected to your children, especially their adult children. Texting is a standard. Different things online that maybe cause you to have some rapport with your children. Next, this would be probably the most important one, establish some standards and filters. If you pay the cell phone service, or you bought the whatever, or they're under your roof, they're yours. That's not their phone, that's not their device, that's your device, and you have the right to manage that. And so I encourage you to be assertive, not aggressive, but assertive as a parent. And one of the big things I see is mealtime. Have you ever been in a restaurant and why are you guys even out to dinner together? You know, you could do what you're doing right now without gathering together. I've been in groups lately where the rule of thumb is anybody who picks up their device during that meal, they pay for everybody's meal. That kind of addresses some of that. So maybe you can implement something creative in that vein. But I think family time, meal time should be no-fly zones. And then just times you want to spend offline in meaningful board games. One of the things I have noticed with our especially my boys and younger, is they don't have the patience to learn how to play a board game. It's immediate gratification, and I think we need to push back on that to talk through the rules and how this works, and manual kind of things need to continue to play a part even as we integrate technology. And then the last one would be discovering and develop an understanding about online privacy. One of the things I'm dealing with right now on multiple fronts are things that have occurred online where there was the pretense or the naive view that what was going on was private. And as a result of that, some things have happened to children or young people. And so just encourage you on those fronts, anchor your lives in eternal things, be aware of major trends, have honest and open conversation, engage with them in their world, establish some standards and filters, and then lastly, develop an understanding about online privacy. And here would be the final thought in this area. See technology as a tool. It's an instrument. If it ever becomes the idol of your home, I think then you do need to practice some radical amputation, throw the TV out the third-story window, or whatever you choose to do with some other devices. But see it as a tool. If it's being used as that for a godly purpose, I see no harm in moderation on that front. So the premise of the question may be a bit jaded. I don't know who asked the question, and maybe you've gotten burnt by technology as I have at times, but I would caution you to make sure that you view it, I think, in a way that the Spirit would apply. All right, the second question for just a moment is this. Number two, how do we navigate? And this is a key question in our church that we really work at, helping you as families. How do we navigate the tension that always seems to appear between family time in church time? I begin by responding to that with the truth that God created both, did he not? The family is a God-ordained institution. The church is a God-ordained institution. And I harp on this because this probably defines my ministry mindset almost more than anything, and that is this: God's will is never mutually exclusive. What's best for your family is also what's best for this church, and vice versa. And if those two things conflict, I would assume that the fault lies not with God, but with us and how we're implementing his will in our lives. So don't separate the two. Don't pit the two against one another. They both serve a role in the heart of our young people. And I would just say this: many in this room, decisions you've made for Christ came in the home setting, but I would probably be safe to assume that at least as much occurred in the context of the church camp, Sunday school class, some other third party that taught you God's word, and God used that to work in your heart. And so both work in harmony. Don't allow your own mind or others to separate them or to pit them against one another. Secondly, number two, this would be a second way to navigate the tension. Be a contributing part of supporting the church God has put you in, church specifically where those leading want to support, train, and challenge your family members in a Spirit-led manner. And I think it's a responsibility to have your family in church. That's a key responsibility, and I know that you value that as well. Thirdly, this would be another practical way to navigate the tension. Be willing to serve as a family. That's something I'd like to see our church improve on, looking for ways that couples serve together, families serve together. I think that's very helpful in strengthening both relationships. A couple more there: be faithful to weave the church teaching and experiences into your family devotion life. I think it's invaluable to reference back to, and I do this regularly with my boys, not as often as I should, but I'll decompress them after a Sunday, partly to check on any heresy being taught in our church. No, I'm just kidding. But I will ask them, what was the lesson on? And use that throughout the week to build upon. And hopefully vice versa, our teachers are asking them, what are you learning at home? And those two things being in harmony. For you grandparents as well, work for ways to build connections between what you're teaching and their parents are teaching, what they're learning in other forms. A couple more there: have family interaction with church people outside of church service times. I think that's a key one. that your kids see Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so in a context other than the church, and that interaction between their peers as well as those that maybe teach and lead them. The next one, stay home from church whenever you have a family function. You know that's not a true point there. That's a not point. I think sometimes if we're not careful, we tend to separate, or again, as I said, pit family versus church. And I just encourage you as much as possible. Maybe this is a philosophical difference on my part with some of you, and I'm praying for you. You'll see the light. I'm just kidding with you. That we plan our family time around everything else. And for some in the room, I don't know that you do that in your own life as it pertains to the church. Build your schedule around what God has called you to. And here's the thought. If God has called you to this church, or if you're visiting from another church, don't you think probably He's calling you to be faithful to what that church typically is doing? I know there are exceptions to that. My own wife is out sick today, but I think we need to be very careful with what we're conveying to our children and to our grandchildren with our faithfulness. Don't force your family. Don't let others force you to pick between your family and your church. And then the last one would be this. Work at finding rest time other than on Sundays. I find that as a common denominator. People who work 6 days a week, very long days, don't spend any time as a family outside of Sunday. And I think that's a very sincere but frequent conflict that's occurring. My wife and I regularly have our families, we'll schedule showers and things on Sundays. And they're choosing to schedule, and they know what our obligations are, and we don't go to those on a Sunday. Obviously, I have a different responsibility, but I just encourage you to think on that, how maybe you can find family time, rest time, other than just on Sunday. Get some of it on Sunday, but allow it not to produce conflict. All right, the last three questions we're going to talk about tonight, and these will be more practical, and I'm just giving you two kind of to begin today. Tonight we're going to talk about, for just a little bit longer in development, how do we avoid motivating our children through shame? I think that's a key question that we'll address tonight. The second one is, how do I make time for my children when I'm so busy and I come home so tired? Some of you stay home all day and are so tired, but those two. And then the last one, and this is a key one that I think many of you have this question. This was asked by several in kind of the spirit of this question. How do I, as a grandparent or mentor, influence kids to whom I have limited access and from others receive inconsistent influence? So it would be someone you don't see all the time. They're maybe getting teaching that's not consistent with God's word. How do you manage that as a third party? And so we'll look at those this evening. I hope that'll be a help to you, and even the things that we talked about this morning. I wanted to go through a few other questions this evening. This morning we talked about, these would be questions submitted by our church family. How do we keep technology to a minimum? We talked about some safeguards and filters on that. One thing I wanted to add that we do as a family, and this would be with the age of our children, this may change as you grow. I don't know that we'll change a lot of it, but we have a time limit that our kids use their devices every day. It's different on school nights than weekends. They love that. They're in here this evening, so they're hearing me say that. And also it's in our presence and only with permission. So they're not off by themselves, and they don't just assume they can do so. Also, I monitor our access through our modem, or how we access the internet in our home, and there are a lot of different devices and technologies. If you're looking for something to protect your home on that front, some of our other guys that are a bit more tech-oriented could help you with that. And so I hope that's something that you'll consider. And then the second question we talked about for a few minutes as well this morning was, how do we navigate the tension that always seems to appear between family time and church time? And just encourage you not to see those two things as counter one another. They're both God-ordained. And if they are God-ordained, then they do fit together. I think it's just us figuring that out. And so I encourage you to make sure you put your family first when that's required of the Lord, and vice versa with the church. A couple we want to discuss tonight, and this one is near and dear to my heart philosophically. We practice this in our parenting, and tried to encourage our church as well. How do we avoid motivating our children through shame? And I wanted to give you a few thoughts tonight. Some of these are things I've compiled from other authors, as well as a few maybe applications in our lives that we've observed. This question prompted me to dig a bit into and reflect on sometimes where maybe I parent that way or even pastor that way. And an author made a statement that really brought conviction and challenge to my life. He said, quote, if you parent using fear and intimidation and shame, Your kids won't turn to you when they mess up or encounter something they shouldn't have done. They might, however, open up to you when they know there is grace available to them. That does not mean there's never consequences for disobedience or unwise choices. It just means that our love, affirmation, and affection are based on grace, not on their performance. And I think that's something we need to work on in our families, is making sure that we handle their failures in a way that opens up conversation and resolution as opposed to shutting down. So just a few things that give you practically tonight that may help you parent or grandparent without shaming your extended family into submission or compliance. Number one, don't forgive and then bring it up to them, your family, your friends. We'll talk about this more with prayer, but I'm amazed at parents and grandparents that, just to be perfectly blunt with you, gossip about their children and grandkids. Let me tell you what they're doing wrongly. Let me talk about what I just saw when I was at their home last week. That's wrong. And I just encourage you to be very careful with that, especially if you've granted forgiveness to them. They've sought it. There's been resolution. You don't even bring it up to yourself again. And so that's, I think, a key part of not shaming, piling on, especially a sincere, contrite child or grandchild in your family. Number two, don't overreact emotionally to honest, minor mistakes. As a dad, I tend to do that. It's an inconvenience to me. I'm frustrated because we just covered this last week, and so you have to be very careful with that. Thirdly, don't micromanage to help them avoid future mistakes. That's a big one. I don't ever want you to embarrass yourself again, and so I'm going to help you control every little aspect of your life. This one I touched on this morning. Look for opportunities to catch your children doing right. Be as vigilant on that front, if not more so. Look for things they're doing well, and I'm not talking about sappy, always affirming kind of tone, but look for those opportunities and affirm them. A couple more, don't forget your own shortcomings and what it feels like to be shamed by others. Don't forget what that feels like. They're a real person, your child, your grandchild, and we never respond ourselves very well to being shamed into compliance. And then the last one I think is of utmost importance. Realize that often, and someone shared this with me as I was kind of brainstorming with leaders in my life that I was getting feedback and prep for today. Someone said this: realize that often the reason you shame your child is that you are ashamed of how they've made you look more than how they've made Jesus Christ look. And I just to caution you with that. You remember, I'm your dad and you just made me look bad, or mom, you just made me look bad, and that tone will never inspire the next generation. It must be about their projection and reputation for Jesus Christ. All right, second question tonight, two more. Number four, how do I make time for my children when I'm so busy and come home so tired? A couple of you gave a question with that kind of feel. Just want to give you a few practical things tonight in this area. Number one, plan ahead on your vacation and leisure activities. What you plan happens, and so I encourage you to plan ahead on that. One that I have found to be helpful is watch your kids expend energy. Just watch them. You may not have the energy yourself, but just be there. A lot of times they just want an audience. They just want a referee. And a lot of times you can maybe not have the energy to participate, but to watch in an active manner, if that makes sense. That's what lazy people say right there. Okay, watch in an active manner. Thirdly, I thought this was helpful. Go for manual walks or bike rides in the evening. Our energy, this is just practical tonight, maybe helping your family. Blood flow is key to energy. And if you sit lethargically on your lazy boy in the evening, probably you're not going to be able to muster up the strength to go out for a t-ball game. But if you just kind of ease into that with something that gets the blood, the heart pumping, tends to bring back some energy in the evening or when there's an ebb. And have you found kids tend to be most energetic when we're least energetic as adults? That just tends to jive. Some of the kids are smirking as they say that. They may do that on purpose, but that's a way to kind of match their energy level. Another one, find projects on the house that need done anyway that you can do as a family. We found that to be very helpful. We're remodeling right now. My boys, they chip in even of their own free will and offer to help and try to include them in that. Stuff that has to get done anyway, share time together in that way as well. Facilitate learning and growth that is proctored by other resources available to you. You may not have the energy or wherewithal to teach them in an area. Find somebody else who can, whether that's through video format or some other resource that you can bring in, especially for our homeschooling families. That's something that I know you do regularly, something we all can practice. And then the last one, and I find this to be very important, spending time with our children, be willing every now and then to drop everything just to have a fun day or a few hours together. Kids love impromptu things, and I think that's something that we can all work on. I have a firm schedule, and I don't have a schedule for those kind of things, and I have to work at that myself. All right, last one is this. Fifthly, how do I, as a grandparent, this would be for some of our senior folks or middle-aged and up who now have grandkids, how do I grandparent or mentor kids to whom I have limited access? I'm thinking specifically of grandchildren, probably is the tone of the question, and receives inconsistent influence. So maybe their immediate authority is not leading them as we would think would be proper biblically. What are some things that we can do in relation to them? So especially our grandparents, I think these few practical things, and I picked the brains of some other folks in my life at this stage that might be a help to you. Number one, be eagerly available to watch them even when it's personally inconvenient. Don't just do it when it fits in your schedule. I think you miss a lot of golden opportunities with your grandkids or those that maybe you have some access to, but it's only when it's maybe inconvenient to you. Be willing to drop what you can to take that opportunity. Number two, be considerate of the parents when buying gifts or providing activities. Defer to them. Try to build consensus authority-wise before the children. Thirdly, stay positive in your teaching. Avoid confronting the other influences in their lives if at all possible. You focus on the child. They're not aware of a lot of the issues. If they're younger, focus on things you can teach them that are positive. This one I thought was very wise. Ask loads of spirit-led questions and then wait patiently to be asked for answers. Let the child ask you for the answer. You may give a question and then just let that set in their heart and mind for a while and let them then respond. And that often leads to great influence. Don't try to fix or worry about what is outside of your control. Yield those matters to the sovereign Lord. Ultimately, that child is the Lord. He's responsible for them. Be very careful not to try to micromanage or worry about what's going on in other settings. Don't allow resentment or bitterness to fester when you're ignored or forgotten. And I see that often as an issue for those who have grandchildren, that maybe there's a strain in the relationship. Don't be defensive when you're misrepresented to the children. Allow your actions and tone to do the talking. And then the last one was this, and this is important. Claim the transcendent promise that is not fulfilled until adulthood. And here's the promise. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Really, the jury is out on any child until they reach adulthood. And claim that promise. Just keeps planting those seeds. However things are trending, make sure you do your part. And I have found this to be true. We'll talk about this more in our study tonight. Many times a child who grows up in a home that's broken or dysfunctional, when they reach adulthood, they'll reach out to, if the Spirit is at work in their heart and life and you've been faithful to keep the right tone, that relationship blossoms after they reach adulthood. And so just encourage you to see the course and to be faithful in each of these areas.